Throughout history, humans have used tattoos to protect themselves against sorcery, claim membership in groups, declare their love, honor their loved ones, or simply express themselves. And it looks like tattoos are going nowhere because as of 2022, 46% of the United States population has at least one. That's why it's not shocking that tattooing has taken the 6th spot amongst the fastest growing industries in the country. And it's safe to assume that this percentage will only go up. But have you ever stopped and wondered when this form of body modification came into existence and how it changed over the years? Let me tell you. Tattoos date back thousands of years. Have you ever heard about Ötzi the Iceman? He's the 5,200-year-old mummy who was found embedded in glacial ice in 1991 in the Ötzi Alps. Yep, that's how he got the nickname Ötzi. The reason I'm talking about him now is that he holds the record for the oldest tattoos in the Guinness World Records. He had 61 markings across his body that are considered to be tattooed by the experts. These markings are composed of vertical and horizontal lines which were created from fireplace ash or soot pigment. Ötzi, however, was not trying to express his true self with them. When they examined Ötzi's bones in detail, they noticed that there was age or injury-related degeneration on the tattooed areas of his body. This made scientists believe that his tattoos may have been related to discomfort relief treatments similar to acupuncture. That also explains the somewhat random distribution of those markings on his body. Experts also believe the fact Ötzi had so many tattoos means that others in his culture knew about tattooing and that he wasn't the first person ever to have tattoos. Although Ötzi's tattoos are considered to be therapeutic, evidence of figurative tattoos, which are images of real subjects such as animals and so on, were also discovered on 2 5,000-year-old Egyptian mummies. As well as pushing back evidence of the practice of tattooing in Africa by 1,000 years. This discovery also holds the importance of changing the belief that only Egyptian women got tattoos. However, other mummies with tattoos have been recovered from at least 49 archaeological sites, including locations in Greenland, Alaska, and the Philippines, which only suggests that tattoos were a worldwide thing. But despite all this evidence that shows the art of tattooing is ancient and universal, the exact date of when and where it began is unknown. There are written records that date tattoos back to 5th century BCE Greece, where they were used to mark criminals and enemies so that it would be easier to identify them if they tried to escape. Romans and Persians also used tattooing for the same purposes. Other cultures, on the other hand, had different uses in mind. In the Philippines, tattoos were symbols of tribal identity, kinship, bravery, beauty, and social or wealth status. They were also believed to have magical abilities and were done as protective talismans against any evil supernatural forces. Consequently, the process of tattooing was believed to be sacred, therefore it involved some rituals. For example, if an artist or a person who was about to get a tattoo sneezed before the tattoo began, this was seen as a sign of disapproval by the spirits. So the session would be called off or rescheduled, and once a tattoo was complete, a celebration usually would be held on its behalf. When it came to ancient Egypt, tattoos were originally used to show a dedication to a deity, and they were believed to convey divine protection. What's worth mentioning here is the fact that many of the tattooed mummies discovered in Egypt were female. One of those mummies came to be known as Amunet, the tattooed priestess of Hathor, who had a variety of tattoos on her body. When she was first discovered, experts initially thought that due to the placement of her tattoos, these were either done as a medical treatment for a lower body condition, or they were simply the markings of lower status. But in recent years, a further examination revealed that she was a person with high social status, so the previous theory was debunked. This discovery led some to believe that her tattoos possibly functioned as protection against the difficulties of pregnancy and childbirth. Now let's take a look at Japan's history with tattoos. Tattooing for spiritual and decorative purposes was widespread in Japan, and it actually extended back to at least 300 BCE. Some written texts also describe tattooing and other bodily markings to indicate social differences among Japanese people. By the 17th century, however, most criminals were tattooed as a mark of punishment. And by the mid-19th century, tattoos were banned altogether, and those who had them were viewed as lacking respectability, which in turn created a subculture of outcasts, who formed the roots of the Yakuza. But how did the modern and more expressionist role of tattoos in the Western world begin? James Cook was a British explorer and captain who was famous for his 3 voyages to the South Pacific, which took place between 1768 and 1779. During one of these voyages, he traveled to the Tahitian Islands, where he was introduced to the art of tattooing. When he landed on the island, he was surprised and impressed by the heavily tattooed men and women, and he wanted to make note of them in his logbook. So, to describe their body art, he used the term tattoo after hearing the locals use a word that sounded similar to it regarding their markings. Before that, tattooing was simply referred to as scarring, painting, or staining. Many of Cook's crew returned to England with tattoos from this voyage, which, in return, restarted a tattoo tradition among the sailors. They started using tattoos as a way to record their travels. For example, they would get an anchor tattoo if they crossed the Atlantic Ocean successfully, or a shellback turtle tattoo if they crossed the equator. This paved the way for the traditional style of tattooing. By the 19th century, although tattoos were still largely associated with sailors, they had spread to British high society as well. During the 1870s, they had even become fashion statements among some members of the upper classes, as well as royalty. The people who had them among the high society included British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's mother, Lady Randolph Churchill, Prince of Wales, the future Edward VII, and his sons, as well as several of Queen Victoria's relatives. It was even rumored that she herself had a tattoo of a tiger fighting a python in the area of her body that could easily be covered with clothes, just in case. This all led to tattoos becoming a mark of wealth by the late 1880s. In 1891, the tattoo machine was created by Samuel O'Reilly, who was a New York City tattooer himself. His design was based on a modification of Thomas Edison's electric pen, which was originally designed to help businesses with document duplication. It was also around the same years that tattooed women started to make appearances, though mostly in the circuses to entertain people. Although that industry eventually slowed down, by the 1920s, more women began to get tattoos as a cost-effective alternative to makeup, since products were so expensive at the time. In 1939, Mildred Hull became the first female to open her own tattoo shop in New York. It was around this time that the US introduced Social Security numbers, and many citizens got theirs tattooed on their bodies as a memory aid. However, despite these tattoos, decorative tattoos continued to be looked down upon. If you had a tattoo during the 50s or the 60s, you would still be viewed as a rebel or a criminal by the majority of people. In 1961, the New York City Health Department actually banned tattoos because they saw them as the cause of spreading diseases. The ban was not lifted until 1997. Today, tattoos are so common that even toys have them. So there's no ban, no stigma, no style or color restriction, and nothing to stop you from getting the tattoo of your dreams. Maybe except your mom.
The Sahara Desert is like a Mad Max movie. Scorching heat, endless dunes, and an overall barren wasteland. A place where no one could live, right? Well, forget all you know about it. Because 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a lush paradise of grasslands, lakes, and rivers, and the home of a ghost civilization that vanished without a trace. Our tale begins in the 1930s, when a Hungarian explorer stumbled upon a cave in the middle of the Sahara. Inside, he found something bizarre: ancient rock paintings of people swimming in a lake, surrounded by giraffes, hippos, and crocodiles. At the time, everybody shrugged it off as some symbolic depiction of the afterlife, because really, who would imagine a lake in the Sahara? Well, fast forward some 70 years later, when a group of archaeologists made a discovery that flipped the script. In a rock shelter in Libya, they unearthed 15 mummies, along with baskets, ceramic pots, and other everyday items. This may look like prehistoric junk to most people, but to archaeologists, it was like uncovering a key piece of evidence. Those people weren't just passing through, they lived here. You see, those weren't just any mummies. They were some of the oldest naturally mummified humans ever found, dating back over 7,000 years. Take that, Egypt. 2 of them still had readable DNA, preserved thanks to a rare natural mummification process, almost a miracle considering the Sahara's climate's ability to turn everything into, well, beef jerky. Scientists struggled to understand where those mummies came from for a while, because the mitochondrial DNA they recovered was not helpful at all. But thanks to scientific progress, they eventually managed to do a full genome analysis that revealed some weird secrets. Those people belonged to a human lineage that was completely unknown, and they lived isolated from the rest of humanity for thousands of years. For decades, researchers assumed that the place where they lived, the Green Sahara, was like a prehistoric highway, a lush corridor that humans and animals used to migrate between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. But the mummies demolished that theory, like a hippo sitting on a sandcastle. Their DNA showed zero genetic mixing with sub-Saharan and Eurasian migrants, keeping their genes pure for 7,000 years. Their closest genetic relatives weren't their neighbors living right below the famous desert, but some ancient hunter-gatherers from Morocco, and even some guys that lived in the Czech Republic, when it wasn't even a country yet, 50,000 years ago. We're not out of the woods yet, because those mummies also carried some teeny-tiny traces of Neanderthal DNA, just 10% of the amount found in modern Eurasians. Now, if you paid attention in school, then you know that Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia, and early humans only mixed with them after migrating out of Africa. But those Green Sahara folks never left Africa. So how did they get Neanderthal genes? The leading theory is that their ancestors mingled with Neanderthals in North Africa 50,000 years ago before settling in the Sahara and cutting off contact with the outside world. Archaeologists also found cattle bones and tools made of stone and wood at that rock shelter, proving that those people led a thriving pastoral lifestyle. This discovery made scientists scratch their heads for a while because, you see, animal domestication was not developed in Africa. So how did they learn it if they never mingled with anyone? Did they have ancient YouTube tutorials? Probably not. The researchers believe they must have traded knowledge with neighboring groups, but just knowledge, no saliva. It's almost too hard to believe that no outsiders mixed with them. After all, who wouldn't want to live in a thriving civilization in the middle of a green paradise, drinking milk, eating meat, and even using animal blood as a protein source? Ooh, yummy. They didn't have to hunt for every meal, thanks to their livestock, and the abundant water made life pretty sweet. And yet, they never married outsiders. Why? Maybe it was a cultural choice to never date outside their own group. Or maybe the landscape itself kept them isolated. This is where scientists place their bets. They believe that the dense forests and rivers that existed in the Green Sahara acted like nature's no trespassing sign, creating a geographical barrier that isolates animals, plants, and whole societies. This isolation is the reason why their genes were so unique. These guys weren't swapping spit with anyone else. But this genetic time capsule almost didn't survive. For most of the last ice age, the Sahara was even harsher than today, a true dead zone where humans couldn't survive. 70,000 years ago, even the toughest people disappeared, retreating to the Nile Valley and the Mediterranean coast. Why? Because Earth was a climate bully. Massive glaciers stole all the moisture, weakening monsoons until rain clouds barely reached North Africa. Then came the knockout punches. Armadas of icebergs flooded the North Atlantic, triggering devastating droughts each time. This was the Sahara's ultimate keep-out era. Now, you're probably wondering how in the world the Sahara turned green after all this, and then went back to being a desert again. Well, it all started 15,000 years ago, I wasn't around then, when Earth was shaking off the last ice age. Our planet's axis was a bit wobbly, and because of that, the northern hemisphere got closer to the sun getting extra sunlight and heat. This eternal summer turned North Africa into a giant moisture magnet, pulling water from the Atlantic and making it all rain down on the Sahara. The result of this ridiculous amount of rain was a lush savanna, complete with lakes the size of small countries. But the African humid period was not just a one-time miracle. The truth is, this eternal on and off switch between green and desert happened to the Sahara more than 230 times since the desert was born. During one of these events, the Sahara even expanded, getting bigger than it is today. So when the green Sahara showed up, you can bet it brought the ultimate ecosystem glow-up. This wasn't just a light dusting of grass. We're talking full makeover. The transformation was so complete, it even reshaped animal populations. Cheetahs suddenly struggled with the new prey dynamics, while rodents like the multi-mammate mouse thrived in the suddenly abundant grasslands. But don't pack your prehistoric swim trunks just yet. This paradise had teeth. The Sahara was an ecological maze of crocodile-infested rivers, malaria-carrying mosquitoes, and big cats lurking in the tall grass. Crossing it would have been like playing a real-life game of Hungry Hungry Hippos. This is probably why more groups didn't settle permanently. The Sahara's climate cycled between wet and dry every 20,000 years, hardly a stable zip code. For most ancient people, it was smarter to treat the green Sahara like an all-you-can-eat buffet, grab resources and leave before the desert returned. Still, this green Sahara period lasted for 10,000 years, giving our mystery shepherds plenty of time to thrive. But around 5,000 years ago, Earth's axis shifted again, the rains moved away, and the Sahara dried up faster than a puddle in July. As the desert returned, the shepherds from the green Sahara had no choice but to pack up their livestock and leave. Some researchers believe they migrated toward the Nile, laying the groundwork for ancient Egypt, so I guess their legacy lives on. Besides, their pure lineage may be extinct by now, but some faint genes of the mummies can still be found in the people that live in North Africa today. But the introvert mummies were not the only ones using the green Sahara as an Airbnb. They actually had neighbors just around the corner, in a lakeside village in Niger to be exact. Those people thrived for 5,000 years and left behind the oldest Sahara Desert cemetery, including a man buried in a turtle shell, a grinning Halloween man with filed teeth, and a heartbreaking family embrace frozen in time, victims of the very waters that sustained them. Eventually, those people disappeared too, just like it happened to our antisocial friends. This proves that this desert outsmarts everyone, with a landscape that gives paradise with one hand and takes it away with the other. Now, this bad boy was the size of a husky and could maybe pass for one, except it didn't have any fur and was a top predator with extra long, blade-like canine teeth. Ooh, charming. Meet the earliest known saber-toothed animal to have ever lived. It roamed the earth well before the dinosaurs. Scientists made the description of this creature based on its fossils found on the Spanish island of Majorca in the Mediterranean Sea. About 200 million years ago, none of us were around then, the very first true mammals appeared, and they lived right alongside the dinosaurs. But if we trace the family tree of mammals even further back, we'll find an ancient group called Therapsids. They didn't look like mammals we have today, but they had some key features that would eventually help define mammals. For example, Therapsids had special openings on the sides of their skulls for jaw muscles, and parts of their jaw bones would later evolve into the tiny middle ear bones that all mammals, including you, have today. So, the new discovery is what might be the oldest known Therapsid fossil. The fossil, which doesn't have an official species name yet, belongs to a group called Gorgonopsians. Those guys are more closely related to mammals than they are to any other living animals. Some of them were as small as cats, and others were as massive as polar bears. Gorgonopsians had some very mammal-like traits, like different types of teeth for different jobs. But unlike mammals, these ancient predators kept replacing their teeth, even their giant saber-like canines, over and over during their lives. Hey, that would be handy. Until now, the oldest Gorgonopsian fossils we knew about were around 265 million years old. But this new fossil is even older. dating back between 270 and 280 million years. The find was super detailed and complete, including its sharp knife-like fangs, part of its jaw, pieces of its spine, ribs, tailbones, and toe bones, plus most of one of its back legs. Even though the creature's skull wasn't complete, the scientists think it was about 7 inches long, and the animal itself would have been around the size of a medium-large dog, weighing between 66 and 88 pounds. But other than that, it didn't really look much like a dog. Even though it had some lizard-like features, calling it a lizard dog is totally wrong. Mammals and reptiles do share a super ancient ancestor from about 320 million years ago, but their evolutionary paths split a long time ago. When the newly found creature was alive, the island of Majorca was right in the middle of the gigantic supercontinent Pangaea. Back then, this area went through super wet and super dry seasons. Scientists have always wondered if major moments in mammal history happened in tropical places like this, but we just didn't have the right fossils to prove it. Now, with the discovery of the oldest known Gorgonopsian in Majorca, the missing pieces of the puzzle are coming together. It looks like some huge steps in mammal evolution could have happened in low-latitude environments we haven't explored much yet. The so-called gap in the fossil record might just be because paleontologists weren't looking in the right spots. Our hero of the day wasn't the only cool guy rocking the planet before dinos settled in. Over 500 million years ago, the weirdest predators to have ever existed ruled the oceans. The name is a bit tricky to pronounce, so I'm not going to. Okay, it's Anomalocaris, but it just literally means unusual shrimp. This creature looked nothing like anything alive today. Scientists think it was the first true apex predator, the orca of its time. Anomalocaris was massive for its era, as it grew up to 3 feet from its sharp grabbing arms to the tips of its tail fins. For a while, everyone thought trilobites were its go-to meal, but new research shows it wasn't strong enough to crack open trilobite armor. So instead, it was a speedy, agile hunter with awesome vision, and it often picked off soft-body animals that zipped through the open water. Now, another really cool creature from pre-dino times is a fish that could walk on land. Tiktaalik lived in marshy rivers that looked a lot like today's Amazon rainforest. It could grow up to 9 feet long, and it found its prey in rivers and inlets like a modern-day freshwater crocodile. It had a flexible neck and even some early versions of lungs, and thanks to them, it could survive both in water and out of it. Why fish like Tiktaalik started moving toward land about 395 million years ago is still a bit of a mystery. Around that time, the ancient supercontinent called Gondwana was drifting closer to the land that would become North America. This slow movement created lots of shallow, swampy habitats, which were perfect places for crocodile-like animals to thrive. Plus, these areas were near the equator, so they were warm and tropical. But there wasn't a lot of food waiting for them on land, so maybe they moved there for safety reasons. There were fewer predators and better spots to lay eggs there compared to the water. Creatures first adapted to living in open water, then shallow water, then marshes and river edges, and only after a long, slow transition did they finally step fully onto land. Now, how about a millipede the size of a small car and weighing as much as a large dog? This beauty lived over 300 million years ago in what is now England. Back then, during the Carboniferous period, Earth's atmosphere had way more oxygen, over 26%, compared to today's 21%. Scientists used to think the high oxygen levels were the only reason these creatures could get so big. But back then, they found a new fossil from a time when oxygen wasn't that much higher than today. They discovered it purely by accident, when a boulder split just right and revealed one of the most complete and largest giant millipede specimens ever. This one could have lived not just in swampy areas, but also in open woodlands filled with tasty seeds, nuts, and maybe even small animals. There's a chance that this beast wasn't a slow, plant-munching crawler, but a predator that would snap up whatever it could find. After dominating the Earth for about 45 million years, the giant millipedes eventually vanished. Probably the reptiles pushed them out, clearing the way for the age of the dinosaurs. Now, in case you ever wondered what would happen if you crossed a polar bear with the saber-toothed cat, here's the answer. This guy ruled the southern ecosystems after migrating 7,000 miles across the supercontinent Pangaea around 252 million years ago. It had a tough skin like a rhino's and massive canines, perfect for tearing away huge chunks of meat, and it was an excellent runner. Once it got to its new home in what is now South Africa, it replaced a whole group of local predators. But its glory didn't last long, as closer to the end of the Permian period, massive volcanic eruptions made the weather patterns change and wiped out about 90% of all species. And because top predators are usually big, slow to grow, and not super common, they often vanish among the first when massive extinction events hit. And that's how our guy here went extinct. Our final creature of the day was a dragonfly that lived around 300 million years ago and had a wingspan of over 2 feet, 6 long, spiny legs, and huge, bulging eyes. Meganjura. This 4-winged giant is most likely the largest flying insect that ever lived, and it easily outsizes today's dragonflies, which are its distant relatives. Like modern dragonflies, Meganjura like to hang out in open areas near ponds and slow-moving streams. But unlike today's dragonflies, it wasn't just catching tiny bugs. This guy was likely the top predator in these open spaces. It used the spines on its legs like a flying trap to snatch prey out of the air, including other flying insects, small amphibians, and even lizard-like creatures. Scientists found the first fossils of Meganjura in 1880 in the coal-rich rocks in France. The fossils were incredibly well preserved and showed off the detailed vein patterns in their wings. Scientists think Meganjura grew so huge because it didn't have much competition from vertebrates, and the air back then, during the Carboniferous period, had a lot more oxygen than it does today.
This is a real human brain. Well, it was, until a hot cloud of ash turned it into glass. This crazy transformation happened almost 2,000 years ago, when Mount Vesuvius decided it was a good day to erupt and destroy cities like Pompeii, Atlantis, and Herculaneum. This particular brain belonged to a young man who lived in 79 CE in Herculaneum. Not the most famous Roman town, but it was the first place that was discovered under Vesuvius's ashes way back in 1709. Around 200 years later, archaeologists found the remains of this young man lying face down on a bed. All the smoke and ash probably made him disoriented, so while most of the citizens of Herculaneum rushed to the shore, hoping to be rescued, the brain guy ended up trapped inside a building and passed out. Weirdly enough, this saved his brain from completely disappearing. How in the world does a brain turn into glass? Well, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, it didn't expel just lava. It also sent away a really hot cloud of ash before the solidified lava could flow down. This type of lava, known as pyroclastic flow, could get as hot as 869 degrees Fahrenheit, an insane temperature, we know. Hot enough to melt your brain, but not hot enough to turn it into glass. The cloud of ash, however, can reach temperatures between 932 degrees Fahrenheit to 1,112 degrees Fahrenheit. But to turn something into glass, you don't just need heat, you need rapid cooling too. To put it simply, you have to heat something to a very high temperature until it melts into a liquid. If you let it cool down slowly, the molecules of this liquid will start to calmly organize themselves in the shape of crystals. But if this something cools down super fast, it will solidify in whatever shape the liquid was. It's like making ice cubes. If you pour water into a tray and stick it in the freezer, it will turn into ice because it cools down quickly. But if you leave the water out at room temperature, it'll just evaporate. This means that the brain melted due to a really high temperature, but before it could crystallize, for example, or just boil away, it got really cold. The flow from the eruption was not hot enough for this to happen, but the cloud of ash that reached town before the pyroclastic flow was hot enough to start this process, and fast enough to leave just at the right time. To figure out the exact temperature needed for this brain-to-glass transformation, scientists used a technique called differential scanning calorimetry. This fancy name basically means that they heat up glass shards to see when they start to change shape. They discovered that the cloud of ash had to be exactly 950 degrees Fahrenheit hot for the brain cells to start melting. Now, remember how I said this guy was inside a building, but most of the citizens were outside? Well, those people were also exposed to this drastic change in temperature, but they didn't turn into glass because they were not being protected by the walls of a building. The protection provided by the skull surely helped our guy, but it was not enough. And since other people didn't have the same protection, their brains basically poofed. And before you ask, no other parts of his body turned into glass. You see, you need some liquid for the glass-making process to happen. The brain has a lot of water and fat, which makes it a prime candidate for the glassification process. Yes, I've just made that word up. Other organs might have contained liquid, but they weren't as protected as the brain, so they were destroyed by the heat. And bones? Well, bones don't have enough liquid, so they just remained the same. The ones that didn't char, anyway. When the brain turned into glass, it looked a lot like an obsidian stone, a type of volcanic glass formed by the cool lava of a volcano. Even the forensic archaeologist who discovered this glassified brain thought it was just a stone at first. He was studying the bones of our hero when he noticed something shining inside of his skull, right in the middle of all the volcanic ash that filled it. To his surprise, this thing was way more fragile than obsidian and smaller too, with some fragments being only a few millimeters large. He only figured this was part of that guy's brain after he took the glass to the lab. With the help of a microscope, he discovered that this was not a stone but an organic tissue, which is basically cells that form our organs. This organic tissue was made by protein, a molecule produced by living things like animals and plants. And this was not just any protein. This one was specific to the human brain because every organ is made of different types of protein. The researchers also found nerve cells preserved inside this glass, complete with the tendrils that help them receive and send messages. The microscope also showed what was left of myelin, a fatty substance that gives a speed boost to the messages traveling along the nerves. This isn't the first time scientists discovered preserved human brains. In fact, more than 4,000 brains have been found since the 17th century. It may not look like a big number, but keep in mind that finding only the brain preserved in a skeleton while the other organs are gone is not that common. You see, the human brain is actually the first thing that decomposes when we're 6 feet under, and it usually turns into liquid. When scientists stumble upon a human brain, it's usually dried, frozen, or literally turned into soap. A brain can be dehydrated if a person perishes in a place that is very hot, like a desert. Frozen brains are found, obviously, in places that are super cold, like polar tundras. A brain turned into soap may sound weird, but the saponification process is not that rare. You need a lot of fat and oils to make soap, and the human brain is filled with this. It's a complex process, but if you find a brain that turned into soap, it must have been buried in a place that is very wet and has little oxygen. Back in 1982, for example, construction workers found dozens of human skeletons in a pond in Florida. They were all 8,000 years old, and 91 of them actually had their brains still somewhat intact. And by intact, I mean they turned into jelly soap. During the 2000s, the brains of 45 people were found in Spain, preserved because of this saponification process. This discovery helped researchers understand the chemical composition of the brains and even the weather conditions of the moment when these people passed away. Scientists also discovered two 3,700-year-old brains in Turkey that belonged to a middle-aged man and a teenager that were trying to escape an attack on their city. This time, the brains turned into charcoal because of a super hot fire. And even though their skulls preserved the brains in this state, the heating and cooling process was probably not intense enough to glassify them. But this? It's the first time in history that scientists have found a brain that naturally turned into glass. It's like finding a unicorn, but in a more scientific way. So what does this discovery mean? Well, for starters, it gives us a glimpse into the lives of those who existed such a long time ago. Secondly, it taught scientists an amazing way to preserve the human brain. It also shows just how powerful nature can be. Powerful enough to turn a brain into glass, but delicate enough to preserve it for thousands of years. So, let's give a shout out to the young man who unknowingly contributed to science. He probably had no idea that his brain would one day be the star of a groundbreaking discovery. His tragic end has given us a fascinating peek into the past. Let's face it, most ancient tombs have been looted at least once. No matter how scary the rumors could have been, most mummies were open too. But one. This is the Bashiri mummy, and it puzzles everyone so much that nobody dares to see what's inside. Meet Howard, but you must know him already if you're into Egyptian history. He's primarily famous for discovering King Tut's tomb back in 1922. But few people know that before this revolutionary discovery, he had probably found another mummy. It happened in 1919, and it goes by several names, either the Bashiri mummy or the mummy of Pacheri, or the untouchable one. Some reports say that Howard stumbled upon the Bashiri mummy in Luxor's Valley of the Kings, just where he would later find Tut's tomb. Despite this find, not much is known about this particular mummy. The reason why it's still unharmed in any way is not because of some superstitions, but because nobody is sure that they can undo what they do if something goes wrong. The mummy is so intricately wrapped that researchers never unfurled it for fear of irreversible damage. The golden rule of anyone who works with antiquities: if you're not sure you can't make it better or preserve it unchanged, do not touch it. History knows many examples of ancient relics ruined beyond repair, say Ecce Homo, or smiling statue restoration. The delicate fabric that covers the mummy's face has this cool design that kind of looks like a pyramid. The researchers are not 100% sure, but this might be the only one of its kind with that embalming style. But without knowing the ancient technique, it's next to impossible not to ruin the mummy while unwrapping and wrapping it back. Back in the day, people, both experts and looters, would unwrap mummies for all sorts of reasons, mostly to study them. Luckily, these days, we have advanced tech that lets us check out what's inside a sarcophagus without having to unwrap anything. After taking a closer look at the Bashiri mummy, researchers figured out that it belonged to a man who was around 5.5 feet tall and lived during the Ptolemaic era, which makes this mummy roughly 2,300 years old. The Egypt Museum shared that the X-ray scan also uncovered an inscription of the guy's name, but it's a bit tricky to tell if it says Pacheri or Nenu, adding to the intrigue. The museum also pointed out that the fancy casing the mummy is in features all sorts of decorated scenes. You can see the mummy lying on a bed, flanked by deities Isis and Nephthys, along with the 4 sons of Horus. Plus, there are 2 images of the funerary god Anubis at the feet of the casing. By the way, Bashiri mummy is not the only one that has remained untouched. This is Issa Temkebde, and Gaston Maspero, a French archaeologist, made the decision to leave her mummy untouched, wanting to keep her resting peacefully since she was in such amazing shape. He did mention, though, that her tomb had been raided long ago. Thanks to some X-ray work, we learned more about the mummy. The scans revealed a few artifacts still wrapped up with the wife of a high priest, including amulets around her neck, right arm, and forehead. The X-rays also showed she had some dental issues and arthritis in her knees. While she passed away as an older woman, it's tough to pinpoint her exact age. However, various sources from her son's reign indicate that she was held in high regard in the kingdom. Issa Temkebde served as the sister wife of Penejam II. You got me right. They were related by blood and were siblings. But back then, it was pretty common to get married this way to preserve the purity of the bloodline. Say that to Habsburg, duh. Their chase for purity only led to inbreeding and the notorious Habsburg's jaw. Right, I guess we should not judge ancient Egyptian rules and morals, but what we can say for sure is that both Bashiri and Isitemkebt were incredibly lucky to stay untouched. The odds were not in King Tut's favor, though. The researchers' work hit him hard. The tomb itself was discovered in 1922, but it wasn't until 1925 that the nested coffins were opened during an excavation. The outer coffin, held together with silver pins, opened up to show another coffin shaped like a mummy, decorated with colorful glass and flower garlands. There were worries about the king's mummy because it had been exposed to moisture. The middle coffin was pretty heavy and didn't have any handles, so they had to be super careful taking it out. Inside the innermost coffin, which was solid gold and wrapped in a red cloth, they found the royal mummy, and this all went down on October 28, 1925. Tutankhamun's mummy, measuring about 6.07 feet, fit snugly into the innermost coffin, which was 6.17 feet long. You can already tell there was a problem, right? Imagine how hard it is to extract something as fragile as an ancient dried-up mummy, especially when there's not much room for maneuver. Plus, the mummy looked sus. It was pitch black. Howard Carter, the lead archaeologist of the expedition, estimated that around 2 buckets worth of oils had been poured over the mummy. But care had been taken to avoid the mask and feet. It was made to preserve him better. The body was positioned at a slight angle in the coffin, and there was a noticeable difference in the amount of dark oils on the right and left sides, indicating that the coffin might have tilted while being lowered into the sarcophagus. This oil created moisture inside the coffins, and over time, it reacted chemically, which Carter described as a sort of slow, spontaneous combustion, leading to the carbonization of the linen wrappings. Unfortunately, the combination of heat and moisture took a toll on the mummy's trappings as well. The crook and flail fell apart, the resin scarab cracked, and the threads holding the hands and mummy's bands started to decay, making everything quite fragile. Plus, the oils hardened over the years, effectively gluing the mummy and mask to the coffin's bottom. To try and separate the mummy from the inner and middle coffins, they were placed in the sun for several hours, reaching temperatures of 149 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite this effort, the mummy remained stuck, so the initial examination had to be done right where it was. The first part of Tutankhamun's mummy the researchers checked out was his lower legs and feet, meaning they started the examination from the bottom up. As they peeled back the bandages, they uncovered the first of many treasures wrapped up with the king. They took their time to carefully document and photograph everything they found. The inner layers of bandages were in pretty bad shape, mostly turning to dust, making it tough to figure out how everything was originally wrapped. Still, the overall methods matched what was seen in other nobles' mummies from that time. Lots of folded linen pads were used to shape the torso and thighs. The outer and inner bandages were made from fine linen, while the middle layers were coarser. They had some intricate bandaging around the shoulders and chest with a similar style around the groin. Each limb, along with fingers and toes, which were fitted with gold caps, was wrapped separately. Tutankhamun even wore gold foil sandals on his feet. They hoped to separate the mummy from the coffin by removing the outer bandages, but the resins had stuck the body to the coffin. So, the researchers ended up chiseling it out. To do this, they had to cut the torso in half at the hips and disarticulate the arms to continue unwrapping. Each part was treated with hot paraffin wax for stability, and later the hands and feet were reattached with resin. Finally, they used hot knives to detach the head from the mask. To check the teeth, it was decided to make an incision around the jaw and neck, which was later fixed with resin. So technically, the scientists did all they could to preserve the mummy, but still, in a way, it ended up being damaged beyond repair. What do you think? Should they have left it in the coffin? Or did they do the right thing? Let us know in the comments.
Something strange is lurking beneath the sands of Giza, and scientists have no idea what it is. Archaeologists just found a hidden structure near the Great Pyramid using advanced ground scanning technology. What's inside? Nobody knows, but excavations are already underway. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most famous monuments on Earth, but it doesn't stand alone. It's surrounded by an ancient necropolis, a massive royal graveyard filled with tombs and monuments. They belong to pharaohs, nobles, and other high-ranking officials. Most of these tombs are above the ground. They're called mastabas, rectangular, flat-roofed tombs built from limestone or mud brick, and they've been studied for decades. But from old movies, we know that these weren't simple graves. They have deep vertical shafts leading to underground burial chambers, where the past was sealed away for eternity. And recently, archaeologists found one curious empty space in the cemetery, a completely unexplored patch of ground. No mastabas, no visible ruins, nada. For years they ignored it, but between 2021 and 2023, they decided to investigate. They didn't dig though. Instead, they used a technology that kind of acts like X-rays for the ground. These radars let scientists see the secrets hidden there. And there was something hidden beneath the sand, something deliberately buried and forgotten. A two-part underground structure. One part was shallow and L-shaped. It's about 33 feet long and buried just 6.5 feet deep. But below that, a deeper, more mysterious anomaly. A structure completely different from anything else in the area. They called it a highly resistive anomaly, which means it's dense and solid, likely made of stone, sand, or even metal. And still, no one has a clue what's inside it. Now, it's clear that humans made the L shape. It wasn't formed by nature. And the shallower structure might have been an entrance to whatever is hidden below. But they only have some theories about what might be hidden there. It's also filled with sand and gravel. It was probably deliberately backfilled after its construction, perhaps to preserve this. Why? Well, we don't know yet. The archaeological team will need to excavate to understand what exactly this thing was and why it was built. The first guess is a lost burial chamber. Many tombs in Giza have underground burial sites, but most have clear surface markers. This one, for some reason, has nothing. But it could be one of them. The second guess is an ancient offering chapel. Egyptologists know that some chapels were built in this shape, but usually they were above ground, not buried like this. And finally, it might be something we've never seen before. If this turns out to be a new type of structure, it could rewrite what we know about the burials of pharaohs. The only way to know for sure is to dig it up, and that's exactly what's happening right now. Excavations are already underway. Archaeologists are racing against time to uncover the truth. But there's a real danger there too. Giza's fragile ancient structures need to be handled carefully. Otherwise, they could be damaged beyond repair. So all we can do is wait for the truth. Now, these tombs always held fascinating mysteries. Unfortunately, we'll never learn tons of these mysteries because of some relentless tomb robbers. Egyptian tombs were built to guard the bodies for eternity. But that absolutely didn't stop people from breaking in and stealing everything valuable inside. They've been bothering these ancient sites for thousands of years, starting way back in Pharaoh's times. Many of the most famous tombs, including those in Giza, Saqqara, and the Valley of the Kings, were looted. It was a common practice in ancient Egypt. And they were serious about this whole thing. They dug secret tunnels to bypass traps and walls, bribed or threatened tomb workers to get inside knowledge, cracked open sarcophagi to grab gold, jewelry, and artifacts. And by the time modern archaeologists got to most of these tombs, they had already been picked clean. The reigning pharaohs got tired of this infuriating nonsense. The Valley of the Kings, the famous burial ground of Egyptian royalty, was supposed to be the ultimate safe zone. Tombs were built deep underground, hidden in the desert. Passages were sealed with giant stone blocks. False doors and traps were added to confuse thieves. Even curses were written on the walls, warnings of horrible endings for anyone who dared to disturb the tomb, which is exactly where we got all those horror stories about mummies from. Spoiler alert, none of it worked. Most tombs in the Valley of the Kings were fully robbed within 100 years of being sealed. Even King Tutankhamun's tomb, one of the most famous in history, was broken into twice in ancient times. Some of them decided to try and fight back. The New Kingdom rulers built hidden unmarked tombs in a way that should have prevented the looters from finding them, but didn't work. Some pharaohs, like Ramses II, were moved in secret to prevent their bodies from being stolen. Nope, didn't matter. The grave robbers always won. That's because tomb raiders weren't just random thieves. They were skilled, organized, and well-connected. They knew exactly where to look. Many were the ones who had built these sites in the first place, and they knew where the entrances were. If they couldn't smash through the doors, they'd dig through the walls, floors, and even ceilings to break inside. They also worked fast, often within a few years after the tombs were sealed, before anyone forgot where the valuable stuff was. The Khufu's pyramid, the one that's next to this newly discovered structure, was looted long before modern times. The one thing left inside when explorers got there? An empty granite box where the sarcophagus used to be. Unfortunately, it's not just about gold. History itself gets stolen during these raids. Ancient Egyptians wrote detailed records of what exactly and where they buried. So when archaeologists compare these lists to what's found, they can see what's missing, which is often everything valuable. Most artifacts don't end up in museums. They just disappear into private collections, where they can never be studied again. Which is, of course, completely unfair. In fact, a few countries have had enough and started passing laws to take historical artifacts back from private collectors. In Italy, if you own an ancient Roman artifact, you must prove you got it legally. China is actively hunting down stolen artifacts, and they must find ways to retrieve it back from the Western collectors. In Egypt, they passed new laws making it illegal for private citizens to own any ancient Egyptian artifacts at all. Other countries, like the US, the UK, Germany, or Switzerland, are completely fine with rich guys owning their history. The British Museum is built on looted things. European empires invaded half the planet and took whatever they wanted back home. Their museums are often full of such stolen artifacts, and unfortunately, they refuse to give most of them back. For example, the Rosetta Stone. It was taken from Egypt by Napoleon's army, then stolen again by the British after they beat the French. Egypt has been demanding to return for years, but they still can't get it back. Or the Parthenon marbles. These magnificent, massive Greek structures were taken from the Parthenon in Athens by a British lord in the 19th century. Greece has been begging for them back ever since, but the UK doesn't feel like it. Not to mention tons of Mesoamerican artifacts scattered in various museums across the world. European explorers raided Mayan and Aztec temples, took statues, jewelry, and sacred objects, and now Mexico is fighting to get them back. Well, wouldn't it be surprising even if this mysterious underground chamber has somehow been looted already? But if it's a newly found place, could it be one of the few that escaped the hands of grave robbers? Could there still be ancient artifacts, untouched for 4,500 years? We can only hope that those guys didn't get there first.
You're heading to Spain with a team of archaeologists to try to find some ancient artifacts. You get lucky and uncover one of the greatest treasures of the Iberian Bronze Age. Iberian refers to the Bronze Age culture of Portugal and Spain. So you find and unearth coins, jewelry, vases, vessels, and two pretty strange items. One is something like a part of a scepter, and the other resembles a bracelet. And you know what's strange about them? They're connected with space. In 1963, several miles away from the city of Vienna, Spain, scientists discovered the treasure of Vienna, one of the most significant gold hoards from the Bronze Age. Interestingly, are there bronze treasures from the Golden Age? Never mind. All the gold found dates back to sometime between 1500 and 1200 BCE, except for that scepter and bracelet. They were made by inhabitants of another planet, so their production date is unknown. Okay, that's a joke. However, a small part of this joke is true. When scientists studied the found gold, they discovered that those two items were made of iron. So what, you might think? Well, the catch is that in the Bronze Age, people didn't mine or manufacture iron. Work with this metal began around 850 BCE, about 400 to 700 years after the creation of the treasure of Vienna. How is this possible? A clue to this mystery can be found in ancient Egypt. In the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, an iron dagger was found, which was also made of similar iron. But this dagger was much more valuable than all the others. And that's because it was made from a space object, a meteorite. Yeah, that bracelet and scepter were also made of meteoritic iron. Its difference from Earth metal is that cosmic iron has a high nickel content, so it all makes sense. People from the Bronze Age couldn't mine iron from the deep bowels of our planet, but nothing prevented them from collecting iron falling from the sky. Just imagine how cool it is to have jewelry or a dagger made of material that has traveled millions of years through the vast expanses of space. Perhaps it even contains particles of an ancient extinct star. Today, these two artifacts from the treasure of Vienna are the oldest recorded items in the Iberian Peninsula made of meteoritic iron. Now, with everything in its place, you can turn your attention to all the wealth of the treasure of Vienna. It contains 66 items: bowls, bracelets, bottles, gold jewelry, 3 silver bottles, and an amber gold button. 22 pounds of ancient gold. People hid it, and only after 3,000 years we were able to discover it. This archaeologist's dream can be found in the Vienna Museum, where exhibits from different time periods are presented, from prehistoric times like 50,000 years ago to the present day. Items from the Iberian period, from the Roman period, from the Arab civilization. You can find not only jewelry and coins, but there are also remnants of columns, ceramics, and other architectural artifacts. The collection is considered one of the most important prehistoric treasures of Europe. And the coolest thing is that you can see it all with your own eyes for just €2, which is about $2. Go to Vienna, find the museum, and enjoy. Hey buddy, I heard you have a metal detector. Could you help me find a hammer I left somewhere in the field? Your old farmer friend asks. You take a metal detector and go searching, but instead of a hammer, you find hundreds, even thousands of silver coins worth $2 million. You're so happy that the farmer lost that hammer, and now you're rich. Stop! Considering that this land belongs to the farmer, would you tell him about the find or take it with you? In reality, neither of these options happened. In 1992, Eric Laws was helping a farmer search for a lost hammer in a field near Hoxne, Suffolk, England. The metal detector stumbled upon a hidden treasure, a huge one. There were silver spoons, gold jewelry, more than 500 gold coins, and about 14,000 silver ones. Eric Laws accidentally discovered the largest collection of gold and silver from the late Roman period in Britain. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, he and the farmer didn't receive the treasure. It's now in the British Museum. Let's move away from the farmer's field to somewhere on the Mediterranean coast. Imagine you're a scuba diver. There was a strong storm yesterday, but now with the water calm, you dive in and discover the seabed covered with gold dinars. This story happened in 2015. The coins which the storm brought to the shore might have been minted even before the First Crusade that started in 1096. This collection is one of the most impressive archaeological finds in the world. All these treasures surely can make the heads of those who find them spin, but they end up in a museum. And that's a good thing, because such wealth can drive a person crazy. A metal detector and a diving suit helped people discover ancient treasures. What's next? How about a dog? Yes, it could be perhaps a great replacement for a metal detector, by the way. So in 2013, 2 people were walking their dog in Northern California on their property. Suddenly, they discovered a rusty can filled with coins minted from 1847 to 1894. There were about 1,500 coins, and they all were gold. Another chance for a carefree, rich future? Not this time. The find caused a lot of controversy among specialists. There was one version, according to which these coins could have been stolen from the US Mint. But later, the US Mint debunked this suggestion as they'd never had this gold in their storage. Anyway, it's interesting what the point was in hiding it all in someone else's yard. Some thief risked their freedom and life to get rich. When they succeeded, they just hid the coins as if they never existed. What a strange deal. Coins, jewelry, meteorite items, it's all cool. But let's end our video with something grand and epic. Archaeologists were conducting research near the Mediterranean coast of Egypt and discovered a treasure trove inside a sunken temple and sanctuary. Despite the waves, earthquakes, and seawater, the massive find was preserved in a not bad condition. The temple was built a very long time ago and collapsed in the middle of the 2nd century BCE. It was an important structure in ancient Egypt. People considered this place holy. Pharaohs came to the temple to seek help from the higher powers of Egyptian mythology to obtain titles for their rule. Titles of kings of the universe. For many people, this place was like the center of the universe, and now it lies forgotten on the seabed, almost ruined. Time spares nothing. Researchers found out the temple had been part of an ancient port city. A long time ago, an earthquake occurred in this area and destroyed the city. Tidal waves softened the ground and dragged the town into the Mediterranean Sea. While studying the temple, scientists found many secret treasures there: silver ceremonial instruments, gold jewelry, and alabaster vessels. In past times, people used them to store perfumes or greasy ointments called unguents. Perhaps in ancient Egypt, they weren't bad in the field of cosmetology. Near the temple, archaeologists discovered a Greek sanctuary. Apparently, the Greeks living in Egypt or coming here on business wanted to pay tribute to Aphrodite, so they created a small building in her honor. In that place, archaeologists found bronze and ceramic artifacts from different cultures. Scientists found out that the Greeks had permission to trade in the Egyptian city and even be its residents. It seems pharaohs living around 600 BCE were favorable to the Greeks. The profession of an archaeologist is very exciting. But what would you do if you found some ancient treasure? Before answering this question, find out what law applies to such finds in your country.
They found the tomb of a royal doctor who lived over 4,000 years ago, a man who held pharaohs' lives in his hands. This man knew secrets that only deities and kings were allowed to hear. And yet, when they opened his tomb in 2024, there was no body, just vivid paintings, untouched by time, and cryptic symbols carved into stone. Who was he, and why was he buried with spells linked to a scorpion deity? The tomb was buried deep beneath the sands of Sahara. The doctor's name was Tete-Nebefu. He lived around 4,100 years ago, during one of Egypt's most mysterious turning points, right at the edge of glory and collapse. These were the final days of Egypt's Old Kingdom. The sun still glinted off freshly built pyramids, but the shadows were already creeping in. The pharaoh, Pepi II, had ruled longer than anyone before him, 90 years. But by the end of his reign, the country was cracking. The power was slipping, the regional leaders were rising, and the Nile floods grew unpredictable. In this shaky period, the mysterious doctor thrived. His tomb was discovered by a Swiss-French archaeological team in the shadows of old pyramids. The weirdest part was that when they uncovered his burial chamber, they found no body, no golden treasures either. Unfortunately, the tomb had been robbed long ago. But what remained was something even more fascinating: the words and images left on the walls. The paintings are still vibrant, bright colors that somehow survived all those years underground. The walls show jars, containers, strange abstract patterns, and geometric shapes. And then there are hieroglyphs, lines and lines of sacred script carved with precision, like someone had poured their soul into every curve. These inscriptions revealed who Tete-Nebefu truly was. Turns out, he wasn't just any doctor. He was the conjurer of Serket. Now, Serket was the female deity of scorpions, sacred and terrifying. Egyptians believed she could stop venom, heal bites, and protect the living from toxic elements. The title, Conjurer of Serket, meant Tete-Nebefu was a specialist in treating dangerous stings and bites. And if he got an entire tomb for himself, He may have been Egypt's top expert in those things, a man who healed with both medicine and magic. But that wasn't all. He also held the title Director of Medicinal Plants, a title seen only once before in all of ancient Egypt. That means he knew the healing power of herbs, roots, and oils like no one else. Now you might wonder, what plants in a huge land of sand? But in reality, ancient Egyptians used herbal medicine that would hold up in some labs today. They created pills, ointments, and inhalers. Most often they chose some active ingredient, a flavor to make it easier to take, and something to deliver it into the body. Sound familiar? And yeah, they didn't have many traditional plants, so some of these ingredients were bizarre by our standards, like using crocodile dung and acacia mixed with honey. They even had formulas for anti-wrinkle creams. And apparently, our mysterious healer was also chief dentist. This title is almost never seen in ancient records. Evidence of Egyptian dentists is incredibly rare. Turns out, our ancient genius didn't just fight stings and study plants. He was also trusted with teeth and jaws, which were actually a huge problem in ancient Egypt. These people may have built wonders, but their teeth paid the price. Ancient Egyptians constantly caught grains of sand in their mouths. They often ate grit-filled bread and raw vegetables, which wore down enamel and caused a horrible condition called attrition. This led to tons of problems, including tooth loss. They had to improvise back in the day. For example, crafting the world's oldest known toothpaste from crushed rock, mint, and pepper, which ironically only made things worse for the gums. Or a toothpaste from things like eggshells, pumice, and natron, a salty mineral used for cleaning. They were also inventing mouthwashes from celery, bran, and herbs to ease the problem. Some mummies were even found with crude metal braces and gold wires attaching missing teeth. Though we're not sure if these were for the living, or was it just a nice little addition added as an afterlife gift. So, Teti Nebefu specialized in all these fields. 3 rare titles for one man. Now back in the day, he must have been admired as incredibly knowledgeable. In a world without modern science, he would have been like a sorcerer who knows how some leaf or bark could save a life. That's why archaeologists believe Teti Nebefu wasn't just any doctor. He was, most likely, the royal physician, the one who treated the pharaoh himself. We don't know for sure which king he served. Maybe it was Pepi II, and who knows, maybe that's why the guy lived so long. But if that was the case, Teti Nebefu may have lived through the final moments of the Old Kingdom, watching the Golden Age crumble from inside the palace walls. And then he was buried. The body was looted, or perhaps just lost to time. But the team says they're still studying the tomb, still uncovering the traces of this incredible man. Overall, ancient Egyptians were practicing medicine on a crazy advanced level. Some practices feel familiar even today. They had hospitals, specialists, surgeries, and many more things, even medical schools. Both men and women were allowed to be doctors. They healed with various methods and practiced surgery with actual tools, scalpels, forceps, even sutures. Some doctors treated only the eyes, others the teeth, the stomach, or even what they called the hidden diseases. They knew how to clean and dress wounds, could set broken bones using splints made of wood or reeds wrapped in linen, and even prevented infections. There were even proctologists. They also built the first prosthetics, like a wooden toe with leather straps that help people walk normally again. The oldest known prosthetic is 3,000 years old. Now, the most shocking part is how they actually even tried to remove tumors. A recent study looked at a 4,000 years old skull. It belonged to a man in his 30s. There were signs of past tumors, and around 3 of them, there were marks, surgical cuts made with a metal tool. That suggests someone attempted to remove or study them, maybe treatment, maybe an autopsy. There was another skull of a woman over 50 years old. It also showed similar signs, but with healed fractures from an earlier injury, which is amazing because her treatment might have actually been successful. Being a healer in this society meant something powerful. It meant being a priest, a scientist, and a magician all at once. To ancient Egyptians, medicine was a necessary art, and they treated it with as much reverence as they did their deities. That's because they believed that sickness could be both physical and spiritual. So a doctor could recite a spell while applying a salve, and a lot of their treatments worked. The reputation of doctors in ancient Egypt was so strong that leaders from other parts of the ancient world, like Persia, actually sought them out. Even Homer, the Greek poet, once said the Egyptians were the most skilled healers of all. Of course, their understanding of the human body wasn't perfect. For example, they thought the heart controlled thought and emotion. They also didn't know what the brain really did. But their approach, observe symptoms, diagnose, and treat, well, that's modern medicine. Sure, they prayed over the wound, but they also healed it, didn't they? Their most famous physician was Imhotep. That guy was a true polymath, an architect, priest, and a healer who became so revered he was later worshipped as a deity of medicine. Yep, a human who was so cool they turned him into a deity. He lived 2,000 years before Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine. And yet, some people joke we should drop the Hippocratic Oath altogether and swear an Imhotepic oath instead. These people weren't just laying the foundations of pyramids, they were laying the foundations of healthcare.